Hi, I'm Liz from Daisy Chain Patterns, and this is the Dale Sweatshirt expansion series. Today we'll be making the Peter Pan collar view. The Peter Pan collar view has a wide Peter Pan collar, little keyhole opening, and tie front at the neckline. To sew the Peter Pan view of this Dale Sweatshirt expansion, you're going to need from the expansion pattern the collar, the Peter Pan collar, the front facing and the back facing. And from the original Dale, you're going to need your front bodice, back bodice, sleeve in the length of your choice, and corresponding cuffs, and your hemband. So to start, we're going to prep our facings. We're going to sew the shoulder seam of the facings. So we're laying these right sides together, our front facing and our back facing, and we're going to sew along here with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And you're going to repeat those steps with the interfacing cut in facing pieces. So again, we're putting those right sides together, so the non-fusible side, right side together, we'll stitch right along here. On your facing piece out of your fabric, we're going to press these seams towards the front. And this is to distribute the bulk later when we attach it at the neckline. And for the seam allowance on your inner facing pieces, we're just going to trim those down about 1/8 of an inch to remove some of the bulk. Now, before we fuse our inner facing on, we're going to sew it to the facing. So we're putting right sides together. So the fusible is facing up here. And I'm using a lightweight woven fusible interfacing here. You can use a tricot or knit facing as well. But we do want to use something that doesn't have a lot of stretch because we're adding stability here to the front neckline when we'll be cutting it open. Okay, now I'm going to stitch this outer edge all the way around with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to turn this right side facing out. Pull through here. Just give that a little finger press with your fingers to get everything turned evenly. If your fabric is particularly stiff or bulky, you may need to put a couple clips along the curves to help it turn out. The knit I'm using today has a good amount of give, spooling, so the curves are turning just fine. And now, once you have that in place, we're going to fuse to turn this into one piece. So again, you can roll this seam kind of between your fingers to make sure the edge is flat. Then you'll hit it with your iron. Now we have a nice clean finish on our inner facing. If your inner facing has stretched or grown a little, you can just trim that away. if you haven't already, you'll want to transfer the stitch guide to your interfacing piece here. Next, we're going to assemble our collar. So you should have 2 collar pieces, and we're going to lay them right sides together. And we're going to stitch this outer edge of the collar with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. You can use a straight stitch here or your preferred stretch stitch. Either will work fine. If you're using a lighter weight fabric than the pattern recommends, or something with a lot of stretch, you may want to interface this piece. But if you're using the appropriate fabric, it should be fine as is. Now we're going to turn our collar right side out. Again, using your fingers or even a point turner here. Just make sure everything's turning out along that seam line, and then we're going to give it a nice press. And if you were using a lighter weight fabric here than the pattern suggests, you may want to understitch. But I find with a nice thick sweatshirt fleece or terry like this, the seam doesn't really move too much. Next, you're going to sew the shoulder seams of your bodice pieces together. So with right sides together, you're going to line up the shoulder seams here and sew that with a 3/8 inch seam allowance using your preferred stretch stitch. I have cut this version out as a dress, so it may look a little different than the normal Dale expansion or Dale sweatshirt. Now we're going to press those seams towards the back. Now we're going to baste the collar in place. So you're going to lay this down right sides facing up on both your collar and your fabric of the main body. At the center front, we want to leave a 1/2 inch gap between the points of the collar. So if you haven't marked your center front, you can fold along your shoulder seams to find that center front line. I'm just going to place a pin here. And then using a ruler, you can mark a 1/4 inch on either side of that. And while I'm here, I'm even going to mark a 1/2 inch down. That's where we'll place our tie once we've basted our collar in place. So again, we're going to place our collar right side facing up and right side facing up on our bodice piece as well. Align your shoulder notches to the shoulder seam, and the front of the collar is going to end right at those 1/2 inch markings we made. Now we're going to use a basting stitch and stitch all the way around the neckline. Next, we're going to place our tie along our neckline. Today I'm using a pre-made spaghetti strap tie. You could also use a flat cording, tubed cording, decorative ribbon or trim, elastic. You could make your tie out of bias tape. You could use twill tape. All kinds of options. So I'm going to use this piece here. We're going to find the halfway point just by folding it in half. And we're going to place that open along that 1/2 inch marking we made. So this is 1/2 inch down from the neckline, and the tie is centered. So we found the middle point here. I'm just placing my pins here out of the way, and now we're going to baste this in place. Now I'm going to take the ends of my tie and just pin them over here out of the way. Now we're going to take our facing and we're going to lay that over our bodice, our collar, and our tie. So we're aligning our shoulder seams with our shoulder seams. And on our facing, we've pressed those seams to the front, and on the bodice, we've pressed it to the back just to distribute some of this bulk. And we're going to match up our center front. So this line here on our guide is our center front line. And either side of our stitch guide should fall just on the inside of our collar points. Now we're going to stitch the opening here of our facing, or of our center front line. Throw in a couple pins down here, just keep our facing in place while we stitch. So using the guide here, we're going to start at a 1/4 inch from the center front. We're going to stitch down, tapering to about a 1/16, pivot, sew across, and about a 1/16, and then we're going to come back up to a 1/4 inch. So you'll have a 1/2 inch gap here, tapering to about an 1/8 of an inch gap down here. Now we're going to stitch along the neckline. So you can start at the center front or the center back. We're not going to stitch through the gap that we left here, that 1/2 inch gap. You'll just start at one end and end at the other. We're going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now we're going to cut down our center front line. So the center line here on your stitch guide, you're going to cut all through your facing and your bodice piece and your tie. And you want to cut to, but not through the stitch line on your facing. You can also trim the bulk out of the corners here. Now we're going to take our facing and flip it to the wrong side of our bodice. And we're going to press. Once you've pressed, you can throw a few pins into your facing to hold it in place. And our last step will be edge stitching the facing down. So I'm going to pin my ties up on my collar pieces here just to keep them out of the way while I'm stitching. So I've got the collar and the ties up and away from our bodice so that they're not in the way while we stitch down the edge of the facing all around the neckline. You can remove those pins you placed in your ties and flip your garment right side facing out. If needed, you can give that neckline one more little press. Just get your collar in the right position. Then you've got a nice tie at the neckline, fully finished and enclosed facing neckline, and a cute little collar. To finish this up, you'll refer to the original Dale pattern for attaching your sleeves, your side seams, and your cuffs and hemband.